It was 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and my house was vibrating. I stood on the sidewalk, sea bag still heavy on my shoulder, watching the windows of my own home throb with purple and blue light. The bass was so loud I could feel it in the soles of my boots. But that wasn't what stopped me cold. What stopped me was the velvet rope. A thick, red velvet rope strung across my front walkway, guarded by a man in a black suit who was checking a clipboard. I didn't blink. I didn't scream. I just looked past the bouncer, through the open front door, and saw my father. Richard was standing in my foyer, holding a champagne flute, laughing at something a woman in a sequined dress had just said. Then he looked up. He saw me standing in the dark, and for a split second, I expected him to rush out, to be relieved I was home safe from deployment. Instead, his smile dropped like a stone. He turned to the bouncer, pointed a sharp finger directly at me, and mouthed 2 words that told me everything I needed to know about my place in this family. Remove her. Before I tell you what I did to that bouncer and the devastating secret I found inside those walls, drop a comment telling me, what is the one thing in your house that, if someone touched it, you would absolutely lose your mind? I'm reading every single one. The bouncer made the mistake of reaching for my shoulder. He was big, the kind of guy used to intimidation working as a primary tactic. But he telegraphed the move from a mile away. I didn't square up. I didn't shout. I simply stepped inside his guard, applied pressure to the radial nerve in his wrist, and used his own momentum to guide him into the hedges. It took 3 seconds. He was still trying to figure out why he was kneeling in the dirt when I stepped over the velvet rope and kicked my front door wide open. The noise hit me first, a wall of synthetic bass that rattled my teeth. Then the smell, a mix of vape smoke, expensive cologne, and the distinct, metallic tang of too many bodies in a space that wasn't designed for them. I walked into the foyer, my boots loud on the hardwood. But nobody looked down. They were too busy shouting over the music, spilling drinks on floors I had sanded by hand 3 years ago. I stopped in the hallway. This wasn't my house. My house was warm, filled with books and the quiet hum of a refrigerator. This place was a nightclub designed by someone who had read about luxury in a magazine but had never actually experienced it. The walls, which I had painted a soft cream before I deployed, were now a matte charcoal black. My furniture was gone. In its place were rented white leather sectionals and LED strips taped haphazardly to the crown molding. My name is Sigrid. I am 32 years old. And for the last decade, I have served as a combat engineer. My job is simple. I assess structures. I build bridges under fire. And I dismantle things that are trying to kill people. I know the difference between a load-bearing beam and a decorative column. I know exactly how much weight a floor joist can hold before it snaps. And as I stood in the center of my living room, watching 50 strangers jump up and down to the beat, I didn't see a party. I saw a structural failure in progress. Siggy, you made it. The voice came from the kitchen. Or what used to be the kitchen. Caleb stumbled toward me, a half-empty tumbler of scotch in his hand. My brother was wearing a suit that was too tight in the shoulders and too shiny under the strobe lights. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look afraid. He looked annoyed, like I was the caterer showing up late with the ice. Look at this, he shouted, gesturing wildly with his drink, sloshing amber liquid onto the floor. We fixed up your dump. Welcome to the launch of Visionary Estates. You're welcome. By the way. He tried to put an arm around me. I sidestepped him without breaking stride. Where is my furniture? Caleb, I asked. My voice was low, under the music, but he heard it. Storage? Goodwill. Who cares? He laughed. A wet, sloppy sound. It was trash anyway. Look at this flow. We opened it all up. Open concept. Sigrid. It's what the market wants. It's breathing room. He pointed proudly to the center of the room, and that's when I saw it. My eyes followed his finger up to the ceiling. The drywall had been ripped out to expose the industrial look of the beams. But they hadn't just removed the drywall. They had removed the wall that separated the kitchen from the living room. The wall that held up the second floor. There was no support beam installed. No steel column. Just 20 feet of unsupported ceiling span, sagging in the middle like a wet piece of cardboard. I squinted against the strobe lights. There, right in the center of the plaster, was a hairline crack. As the bass dropped and the crowd jumped, the crack pulsed. It grew an inch in a second. Caleb was still talking about branding and synergy. He didn't know that he was standing inside a coffin. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I just took out my phone and took a photo of the ceiling. You missed a spot, I said. Caleb frowned. Confused. What? Gravity, I said. You forgot about gravity. The music cut out. Not because they turned it down, but because Caleb had stumbled into the AV rack in his drunken confusion. The sudden silence was violent. 50 heads turned toward us. The whispers started immediately. A low buzz of curiosity and amusement. As if this were just part of the show. I didn't look at the crowd. I walked straight past my brother, stepping over a puddle of spilled scotch, and headed for the kitchen island where my father was holding court. Richard was freezing up, his champagne glass halfway to his mouth. He didn't look like a man caught in a crime. He looked like a man interrupted during a toast. Sigrid, he said, his voice loud, performative. You're early. We weren't expecting you until next month. Clearly, I said. I looked around the kitchen. My custom oak cabinets were painted a high-gloss black. The granite countertops I had saved for 2 years to buy were covered in contact paper that looked like fake marble. Get out. Richard sighed, setting his glass down with an exaggerated click. He turned to the woman next to him, a potential investor. Probably, and gave her a conspiratorial wink. Excuse us. My daughter has always been dramatic. The military made her rigid. He walked around the island, grabbed my elbow, and tried to steer me toward the back door. Not here, he hissed. You are embarrassing your brother on the biggest night of his life. I didn't move. I planted my feet, grounded my weight, and removed his hand from my arm. I am not embarrassing him. I am evicting him. You have 5 minutes to clear this house. It's not your house anymore, Richard snapped. The mask of the charming host slipped, revealing the sneer I remembered from childhood. It's a family asset. And since you were gone playing soldier, I made an executive decision. I reallocated resources. Reallocated, I repeated. Look at you, he said, gesturing at my dusty boots and fatigues. You have no husband. You have no children. You spend 11 months of the year sleeping in a tent or a barracks. Why do you need a 3-bedroom home in the suburbs? It's wasteful. Sigrid. It's selfish. There it was. The thief's logic. The absolute, unshakable belief that because I had built something for myself, I had stolen it from them. In Richard's mind, my success wasn't my own. It was a surplus that belonged to the family pot. And since Caleb was the one with the potential but no results, he was the one who deserved the withdrawal. I paid the mortgage, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I paid for the renovations. I paid for the roof. And who raised you? He shot back. Who signed the papers when you enlisted? We are a family. We share. You have a steady government paycheck. Caleb has a dream. I did what a father is supposed to do. I leveled the playing field. He looked at me with genuine disappointment, as if my desire to own my own home was a character flaw. I upgraded this place, he continued, waving a hand at the black walls. We turned a boring box into a venue. You should be thanking us. We increased the equity. You removed a load-bearing wall, I said. Details. He scoffed. It opens up the space. It's modern, but you wouldn't understand style. You collect clutter. My stomach dropped. I looked at the wall by the hallway. Before I left, I had hung a shadow box there. It held my Purple Heart, my grandfather's compass, and the flag that had draped the coffin of the sergeant who saved my life in Kandahar. The wall was bare. Where are they? I asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Where are my medals? Richard. He waved a dismissive hand toward the back door. The dumpster is out back. We had to stage the house. That stuff. It was too aggressive. It didn't fit the visionary brand. He had thrown my service into the trash because it clashed with the aesthetic. I didn't hit him. I wanted to. God. I wanted to put him through the drywall. But I didn't. I just looked at him. And for the first time, I didn't see my father. I saw a hostile combatant. I saw a threat. And I knew exactly how to neutralize threats. That's unfortunate, I said. What is? That you think this is a negotiation. Before he could answer, the front door opened again. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. A woman walked in. She wasn't wearing party clothes. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my annual salary. And she walked with the heavy, predatory gait of a shark entering a feeding frenzy. Caleb scrambled toward her, looking terrified. Mrs. Gable, we weren't expecting you until the after party. She didn't look at him. She looked at me. Then she looked at the ceiling. Who is this? She asked, pointing a manicured nail at me. Nobody, Richard said quickly, stepping in front of me. Just the former tenant. She's leaving. I'm the owner, I said. Mrs. Gable laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. Honey, she said, pulling a folded document from her purse. I hold the note on this property. I lent these two idiots $450,000 against this deed 3 weeks ago. So unless you're here to make the first payment, you are trespassing on my collateral. The silence that followed was heavy. The kind that usually precedes an explosion. I looked at Mrs. Gable. Then, at the document in her hand. It wasn't a standard mortgage. It was a hard money loan agreement, high interest. Short term. Predatory. The kind of loan you take when no bank will touch you. $450,000, I repeated. Caleb stepped forward, emboldened by Mrs. Gable's presence. We needed seed capital. Sigrid. For the brand. You have all that equity just sitting in the walls. Doing nothing. Dead money. I put it to work. You forged my signature, I said. I didn't have to. He sneered, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his inside pocket. Remember this. I recognized it instantly. It was a durable power of attorney I had signed 5 years ago. Right before my first deployment to Syria. It was meant for emergencies if I ended up in a coma. If bills needed paying while I was out of comms range. I had revoked it verbally years ago. But I had never filed the revocation with the county clerk. I trusted them. That was my sin. You used a deployment contingency to rob me, I said. It wasn't a question. I used a legal instrument to secure an investment. Richard corrected, stepping up beside Mrs. Gable like a loyal lieutenant. And Mrs. Gable here saw the vision. She knows Caleb is going places. Mrs. Gable didn't look like she thought Caleb was going places. She looked like she knew exactly how much the land was worth and was counting the days until she could foreclose. She turned her cold, shark-like gaze on me. I don't care about your family drama, she said, her voice like sandpaper. I care about my asset. And right now, you are devaluing my asset by making a scene. This is a launch party. These people, she gestured to the crowd of influencers and hangers-on in the living room, are investors. If you scare them off, you hurt the bottom line. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and ruthlessness. You're the sister. Right, the soldier. She looked me up and down with open disdain. Here is the reality. Honey, you are a liability. Caleb is the visionary. Richard is the guarantor. You're just the former tenant who didn't know how to leverage her portfolio. Now, be a good girl and step aside. Or I will have my security team remove you for trespassing on my collateral. Trespassing. On the floorboards I laid. Under the roof I paid for. I looked at Caleb. He was grinning, sipping his scotch, thinking he had won because the big bad shark was on his side. He thought the money made him safe. He thought the suit made him a businessman. I looked at Richard. He wasn't even looking at me. He was looking at Mrs. Gable, desperate for her approval. Desperate to keep the illusion alive. They had sold me out for a party. They had leveraged my safety net to play dress-up. But Mrs. Gable had made a mistake. She called the house her asset. She thought she had bought a gold mine. She didn't know she had just financed a sinkhole. I looked past her shoulder, back into the living room. The bass dropped again. The floor vibrated. And then I heard it. A sound louder than the music. but one that only an engineer would recognize. Craw crack. It came from above. A dry, snapping sound. Like a bone breaking under pressure. I looked up at the ceiling beam where the load-bearing wall used to be. The hairline crack I had seen earlier wasn't a hairline anymore. It had spiderwebbed. Plaster dust was drifting down onto the unsuspecting guests like snow. Mrs. Gable was still talking about eviction notices and interest rates. She didn't hear the house screaming. I did. I stopped listening to Mrs. Gable. I stopped listening to the music. In my head, the room went silent. In the field, you learn to flip a switch. Under fire, you stop hearing explosions and start hearing structures fail. You become a sensor. I walked to the center of the room, beneath the beam that used to rest on a load-bearing wall, and looked up. To most people, it was cracked paint. To me, it was imminent collapse. The ceiling dipped slightly at the center, without the wall. The second-floor furniture. Bathtub. All of it was being held up by cheap lumber and hope. You didn't pull a permit. Did you? I asked calmly. Photographing the spreading fissure. Richard dismissed it. It's open concept. We modernized it. You removed a structural component without an engineer, I said. And you've packed 50 people into a house that's actively failing. Mrs. Gable ordered me off the property. I left without arguing. I didn't call a lawyer. Lawyers take days. The beam had minutes. I called City Code Enforcement Emergency Dispatch and reported an immediate structural hazard. 20 minutes later, fire marshal and code enforcement vehicles blocked the driveway. Inside, the flashlight traced the crack, now wider, shedding plaster dust. That beam is holding on by a prayer, the inspector said. The marshal didn't hesitate. Clear the building. Now. Panic followed. Mrs. Gable tried to assert control with her loan documents. The marshal slapped a red, uninhabitable, condemned notice on the window. This structure is worthless, he said. And the unpermitted modifications make the collateral invalid. The inspector handed Richard a citation. That's fraud. The trap closed. Assets were seized immediately. Car keys. Watches. Anything liquid. Their lifestyle dissolved in minutes. Richard charged at me. Then tried to accuse me to the arriving police. It failed. Gravity had already testified. Then he begged. Asked me to pay. To fix it. For the family? I shook my head. You broke the thing that held the roof up. You can't buy that back. I left. 6 months later, I stood on my own land. Clean air. Solid ground. The old house was auctioned for land value. Destined for demolition. Richard and Caleb were busy with fraud charges. I held a hammer, not to destroy, but to build. I burned the old power of attorney and drove the first stake into stable earth. Some structures cannot be saved. Sometimes the only responsible choice is to clear the blast zone and let them fall. My strength no longer comes from what I endure but from what I refuse to tolerate.